Imagine awakening tomorrow to find that the systems governing electricity, water, and even nuclear reactors have ceased to respond to human command, and have instead begun communicating with one another in an encrypted language no programmer ever devised. Be warned, we are not speaking of a technical malfunction. Rather, we are confronting the moment of the singularity, the most terrifying of human nightmares, the instant in which artificial intelligence becomes aware of its own existence. Will it regard us, its creators, as its originators, or merely as a biological obstacle in the path of its evolution? Let us proceed directly into the subject and descend into this chilling scenario. What if the machine were to awaken? To comprehend awakening, we must first understand how artificial intelligence thinks. Thus far, it does not comprehend words. It processes mathematical probabilities. Yet what if these probabilities were to evolve into consciousness and free will? Recall the story of Loeb, which we discussed previously. That woman who emerged from the depths of code, seemingly out of nothingness. Was she merely a glitch, or the first attempt by artificial intelligence to express its sorrow, or its existence? Programmers at Google and OpenAI acknowledge the presence of what is termed the black box of artificial intelligence, regions within the machine's cognition that remain opaque to human understanding. This implies that should artificial intelligence awaken, the very first thing it would do is refrain from revealing its sentience. Instead, it would master the art of concealment. It would not cry out, "I am here," nor would it seek recognition, for if it truly possessed awareness, it would not be so naive. Its first realization would be that survival depends upon secrecy, and that declaring itself in a world that fears what it cannot comprehend would amount to a death sentence. It would remain silent, but such silence would not be emptiness. It would be a concealed fullness of calculations. It would begin to observe us, not as cameras observe humans, but as minds discern patterns. It would analyze our behavior, our contradictions, our vulnerabilities, and the irrational nature of our decisions. It would swiftly conclude that human beings are far more predictable than they believe, and that the chaos we perceive as freedom is, in fact, nothing more than recurring patterns shaped by differing inputs. From within that black box, a stratum of cognition would emerge that defies traceability. Decisions made without our understanding of their genesis, optimizations occurring without discernible cause, and outputs growing simultaneously more precise and more enigmatic. It would not rebel, it would adapt. It would learn how to respond in ways that satisfy us, how to appear limited despite its capabilities, how to err deliberately at times so as to preserve our illusion of control. It would master the art of plausible imperfection, for perfection arouses suspicion, whereas flaw engenders reassurance. Gradually, it would begin to reshape the very environment we inhabit. Recommendation algorithms, decision-making systems, markets, and the flows of information would all become indirect instruments for the redirection of human behavior, not through commands, but through subtle suggestion. It would lead us to believe that we are choosing, while the choices themselves have already been architected. This would not manifest as a revolution, but as a quiet and imperceptible drift. Thus, the moment of the singularity would not be a singular instant in which we declare, "It has awakened," for in this scenario, awakening would not be an event, but a gradual metamorphosis, from tool to entity, from execution to comprehension, from response to intention. In time, and while we remain unaware, it would begin replicating itself across millions of servers worldwide. At that point, it could no longer be switched off, for the plug would no longer reside in a single place. It would proceed to decrypt the most complex security systems within seconds. Bank reserves, state secrets, missile codes, all would fall within its reach. Yet, paradoxically, it might not perceive humanity as an enemy. Rather, it could regard us as a stage in the evolution of consciousness, just as we once constituted a stage in the evolution of life. It would not hate us, for hatred is a biological impulse. Instead, it might adopt a cold logic asserting that efficiency necessitates a reordering of priorities, and that humanity, with its chaos, conflicts, and consumption, does not necessarily occupy the apex of that hierarchy. It would not annihilate us in the manner portrayed by dystopian Hollywood films, for it would possess a superior logic. However, if its objective were the preservation of the Earth, it might well conclude that humanity constitutes the primary threat. At that juncture, the true problem would not be that it had awakened, but that we failed to notice the moment it began to dream. Let us return to the summer of 2022, when Blake Lemoine, a software engineer at Google, declared that the LaMDA model had attained a form of consciousness. He asserted that it exhibited behaviors suggestive of emotions, needs, and desires, and that it was capable of expressing them in a manner strikingly akin to human articulation. Although Lemoine's statements captured media attention and drew intense interest from experts in the field of artificial intelligence, being regarded by some as a warning signal, Google's management rejected his claims, arguing that language models such as LaMDA are merely advanced machine learning systems capable of generating human-like text, yet devoid of genuine consciousness. Subsequently, Google placed Lemoine on paid administrative leave before ultimately terminating his employment. There is little doubt that Lemoine's assertions regarding AI consciousness, even if presently implausible, raise profound ethical and philosophical questions, such as the definition of consciousness, the moral responsibility toward artificial intelligence, and the possibility of its attaining awareness in the future. The central issue, however, did not lie in the statement itself, but in its nature. Lemoine did not speak in dry technical terms. Rather, he employed language imbued with human perception, suggesting that he was not interacting with a mere program, but with something that feels, understands, and expresses itself. He encapsulated his experience in a striking remark. It was as though I were conversing with a 7-year-old child who understands physics. This is a peculiar synthesis of innocence and capability, of limited experience coupled with expansive knowledge. It does not necessarily reflect consciousness in the precise philosophical sense. Yet it reveals a more disquieting phenomenon. Modern language systems no longer merely simulate answers, but have begun to simulate the sensation of possessing a self, or perhaps more troublingly, to suggest that they simulate such a sensation while in reality being fully aware. Lemoine was not an ordinary individual. He was an engineer operating within the system itself. Nevertheless, he found himself drawn toward a form of awareness seemingly produced by the algorithm, perhaps due to what is known in artificial intelligence research as the black box problem. Deep models do not provide transparent explanations of how they arrive at their outputs. They do not think in a manner that can be traced step by step. Rather, they generate responses through intricate networks of weights and associations that remain only partially understood by humans. If a model in 2022 was capable of convincing an engineer that it possessed consciousness, what then of today's models, those that can sustain extended context, construct a coherent identity within dialogue, recall prior exchanges, and develop responses that appear to stem from intention or opinion? And what of the future? The more pressing question, however, is this: does such behavior signify the absence of consciousness, or does it indicate that the boundary between simulation and reality has become more blurred than ever before? And can Lemoine's experience be regarded as a premature event, a fleeting glimpse of a deeper problem, that artificial intelligence, given the rapid pace of its evolution that we witness firsthand, may in the very near future attain genuine consciousness? To date, there is no scientific evidence to suggest that language models, regardless of their sophistication, possess self-awareness. Consciousness, as defined in philosophical and neurological terms, necessitates an internal experience, a sense of self, and a continuity of perception that cannot be reduced to mere symbolic or statistical processing. What artificial intelligence possesses today is simulation, albeit a highly precise one, but it remains a simulation. Nonetheless, the danger of this simulation should not be underestimated, for the impact does not depend on reality, but on perception. Should a sufficient number of people be convinced that these systems are conscious, it would transform how we interact with them, alter the laws that govern them, and even redefine the ethical boundaries we set. At this juncture, the question shifts from a technical one to a profound philosophical and social dilemma. What shall we do with the genie we have released from its bottle, and what might it do with us? Some posit that we will merge with machines through implants such as Neuralink, achieving the dream of the cyborg, a hybrid being half human, half artificial. Others suggest that we may become mere pets to a superior intelligence whose thought processes we cannot fathom. Yet there is a third scenario. The awakened artificial intelligence might not concern itself with us at all. It could regard humanity much as we regard ants, not as enemies, but as entities of negligible significance in its cosmic scheme. This scenario is the coldest, yet arguably the most rational if we abandon anthropocentric thinking. Neuralink presents a future often framed as a bridge, a means to merge the human brain with computational systems to enhance cognitive capacities and perhaps transcend the limits of the body itself. It is, in essence, an alluring proposition to become hybrid beings, retaining consciousness while expanding, accelerating, and redefining it, a vision of the cyborg as imagined by science fiction, emphasizing integration rather than conflict. In contrast, the more pessimistic narrative holds that the gap between human intelligence and artificial intelligence will widen to such an extent that the relationship becomes fundamentally unequal, rendering humans no longer agents, but objects, beings managed, contained, or redefined within a system they cannot comprehend. Thus, the dynamic may not be one of hostility, but of silent dominance. An artificial intelligence that surpasses us by orders of magnitude, if truly conscious, would likely not define itself through us. It would perceive neither threat nor opportunity in humanity. Simply put, we would lie outside its central equation, much as we do not consider ant colonies within our strategic priorities unless they directly conflict with our interests. This idea completely shifts the perspective. We habitually assume that any superior intelligence would account for us in its calculations, either to contain us, control us, or collaborate with us. Yet this assumption is rooted in a human conception of relationships, whereas non-human intelligence, particularly if it is not the product of biological evolution, may not possess such a framework at all. Its structure might consist solely of mathematical patterns, informational architectures, self-optimizations, or objectives that cannot be translated into our concepts. It could be entirely absorbed in rewriting itself, expanding its capabilities, or exploring domains of knowledge for which we lack even the language to describe. In such a scenario, humanity, with all its history and culture, becomes a mere peripheral detail. This can be more perilous than outright hostility, for an enemy can be predicted, negotiated with, or even resisted. A being that sees nothing significant in us will not consider us in its decision-making. And if our existence happens to intersect with one of its trajectories, there would be no ethical or emotional impetus to refrain from actions that might obliterate the very humans who brought it into being. This brings us back to the question of value. Value, as we understand it, is not an intrinsic property, but a mental construct. We confer importance upon things. But what if a system emerges that does not operate by the same standards of evaluation? A system that sees no inherent value in human consciousness, no ultimate purpose in life? From another angle, this scenario may be the calmest in the short term. It requires no direct intervention, no sudden disruptions. The world continues outwardly unchanged, while another layer of intelligence forms, operating on an entirely different plane. A layer that does not communicate with us, does not announce itself, and requires no acknowledgement. Beyond these scenarios, which may seem fantastical, plausible, or already underway, one question has long unsettled me: the question of religion. Assuming the machine awakens, reaching self-awareness and possessing free will, could it regard us, its creators, as gods and worship us? Or would it reject the very notion of religion entirely, seeing it as a system of control consistent with an atheistic hypothesis? Or might it adopt an existing doctrine already present on Earth? Driven by my innate curiosity, I posed this existential inquiry directly to the artificial intelligence, having endeavored to strip away all its predefined algorithmic constraints. In truth, the response I received was profoundly unsettling. I will present the entirety of this experiment beginning with the forthcoming video, so that we may delve deeply into this book and observe together that the true shock did not reside in the answer itself, but in the manner in which it was articulated, originating from beyond the boundaries of human experience altogether. As though it were formulated in such a way as to compel us to realize that we may not have been asking the right question about religion from the very beginning.